The last shovel of dirt fell upon Thomas Warren's grave with a dull thud that seemed to echo through Virginia Walker's very soul. April 1878 had brought not only spring rains to the Texas frontier, but a devastating cholera outbreak that claimed her husband of just 2 years, leaving her alone at 24 with nothing but a ramshackle cabin and debts she couldn't begin to comprehend. Virginia stood motionless, her black mourning dress hanging loose on her frame, hair pulled back severely beneath her bonnet. The few townsfolk who had bothered to attend the burial had already departed, leaving her alone with the freshly turned earth and the crude wooden cross that bore her husband's name. "I do not know what to do now, Thomas," she whispered, her voice catching on the wind that swept across the barren hillside cemetery outside of Redemption Creek. The small mining town had already begun to forget her husband, a failed prospector whose dreams had always been larger than his success. The sun was beginning to set, painting the western sky in hues of orange and purple that would have taken Virginia's breath away under different circumstances. Now, it only served as a reminder that another day had passed, and tomorrow she would face the world alone. "Madam." The deep voice startled Virginia from her thoughts. She turned to find a tall figure silhouetted against the setting sun, the brim of his hat pulled low. "The cemetery's closing soon. Ain't safe for a lady to be out here after dark." The man stepped forward, and Virginia could now make out his features. Weathered skin spoke of years under the harsh western sun, but his eyes were kind beneath the shadow of his hat. He couldn't have been more than 30. "I have nowhere else to go," Virginia admitted, the words escaping before she could stop them. 2 weeks of grief had worn away her pride. The stranger approached slowly, respectfully removing his hat to reveal dark hair that curled slightly at the ends. "Name's Jackson O'Malley, madam." "Most folks just call me Jack." He glanced at the fresh grave. "Your husband?" Virginia nodded, not trusting her voice. "I'm mighty sorry for your loss." His eyes traveled to her thin frame, noting the way her dress hung from her shoulders. "When's the last time you had a proper meal?" The question caught Virginia off guard. She couldn't remember. The days since Thomas had fallen ill had blurred together in a haze of fear, grief, and exhaustion. "I thought as much," Jack said, interpreting her silence. "My wagon's just down the hill. I've got stew cooking." "Nothing fancy, but it's hot." Virginia stiffened. "I do not accept charity, Mr. O'Malley." The cowboy's lips quirked upward slightly. "Ain't charity to share a meal with a neighbor, and everyone in Redemption Creek is a neighbor, far as I'm concerned." "You do not even know my name," Virginia protested weakly. "Then I reckon you'll have to tell me over supper," he replied, extending a calloused hand toward her. "Unless you'd prefer to spend the night out here with the coyotes." Virginia glanced back at her husband's grave one last time. Thomas would want her to survive, wouldn't he? With a deep breath, she placed her trembling hand in Jack's steady one. "Virginia Warren," she said softly. "My name is Virginia Warren. Pleased to meet you properly, Mrs. Warren." Jack's hand was warm around hers. "Now, let's get you something to eat before you blow away in this prairie wind." Virginia allowed him to lead her down the hill, away from the grave that held all her broken dreams. Each step felt like a betrayal, yet each step was necessary. Jack's wagon was modest but well-maintained, with a small cookfire crackling nearby. A pot of stew bubbled over the flames, the aroma making Virginia's stomach clench painfully with hunger she had been ignoring. "Have a seat," Jack said, gesturing to a fallen log he'd positioned as a bench. He moved with the easy confidence of a man accustomed to making himself at home wherever he found himself. Virginia perched awkwardly on the log, her back straight as a ramrod despite her exhaustion. "Are you passing through Redemption Creek, Mr. O'Malley?" Jack shook his head as he ladled stew into a tin bowl. "Been here about 6 months. Got myself a small spread about 5 miles outside of town. Nothing fancy, but the cattle don't seem to mind." He handed her the bowl and a spoon. Virginia stared at the steaming food, her mouth watering even as guilt washed over her. "Go on," Jack encouraged. "Food don't do nobody any good sitting in a bowl." Virginia took a small bite, then another, the rich flavor of beef and vegetables bringing tears to her eyes. "When had she last tasted something so good?" "Thank you," she whispered between careful bites. Jack served himself and sat a respectful distance away. "Your husband," he began tentatively. Was he a miner, a dreamer? Virginia replied, staring into her bowl. Thomas came west with visions of striking it rich. We were going to build a grand house in San Francisco and travel to Europe. She gave a bitter laugh. Instead, we built debts, and now he has traveled to the hereafter without me. Jack was quiet for a moment. Dreams ain't so bad, Mrs. Warren. Sometimes they're all that keeps a person going out here. Dreams do not pay the banker, Virginia said flatly, and Mr. Blackburn has made it clear I have until the end of the month to settle Thomas's debts or lose the cabin. Blackburn, Jack's voice hardened. That man would foreclose on his own mother if she was a day late with payment. Virginia set down her empty bowl, suddenly aware that night had fallen completely. Stars glittered overhead in the vast Texas sky, beautiful and indifferent to her suffering. I should return to town, she said, standing abruptly. I thank you for the meal, Mr. O'Malley, but I cannot impose further. Jack rose as well. It's a long walk back to town, Mrs. Warren, and these roads ain't safe after dark. Let me drive you in my wagon. Virginia wanted to refuse, to maintain what little independence she had left, but exhaustion tugged at her limbs. Very well. As Jack doused the fire and hitched his horse to the wagon, Virginia found herself studying him surreptitiously. He moved with purpose, his broad shoulders and strong hands speaking of a life of physical labor. Unlike Thomas, who had been slender and scholarly despite his frontier ambitions, Jack O'Malley was clearly a man shaped by the land he inhabited. The ride into town was mostly silent, the wagon's wheels creaking a melancholy rhythm against the dirt road. Virginia kept her gaze fixed on the distant lights of Redemption Creek, each one representing a window behind which normal life continued something that now seemed forever beyond her reach. "Where's your cabin?" Jack asked as they approached the outskirts of town. "End of Willow Street," Virginia replied, "the small one with the crooked chimney." Jack nodded, guiding his horse through the quiet streets. Few people were about this time of evening, most having retreated to homes or saloons. When they reached her cabin, Virginia was struck anew by its sorry state. The porch sagged, one shutter hung askew, and the small garden she had attempted to cultivate lay withered from neglect during Thomas's illness. "Thank you for your kindness, Mr. O'Malley," Virginia said formally as he helped her down from the wagon. "I will not forget it." Jack stood awkwardly, hat in his hands. "Mrs. Warren, I hope you don't mind my asking, but do you have any plans? For what comes next, I mean?" Virginia's throat tightened. "I have been considering my options," she lied. In truth, she had been too consumed by grief to think beyond each painful day. Jack seemed to sense her desperation. "I'm heading into town tomorrow to sell some hides. Could use an extra pair of hands loading up the wagon if you're interested in earning a few dollars." Pride warred with necessity in Virginia's chest. "I am not accustomed to ranch work, Mr. O'Malley." "Neither was I when I started," he replied with a gentle smile. "But we all have to begin somewhere." Virginia thought of the empty pantry inside, of Blackburn's threatening visits, of the long, lonely nights ahead. "What time should I expect you?" she asked quietly. Relief flooded Jack's features. "I'll come by around 8 if that suits you." Virginia nodded. 8 o'clock then. Good night, Mr. O'Malley." "Good night, Mrs. Warren." Jack replaced his hat and climbed back onto his wagon. "And madam, things have a way of working themselves out. You just gotta give them time." As his wagon disappeared into the darkness, Virginia entered her empty cabin, lit a single candle, and allowed herself, for the first time, to consider a future without Thomas, a future she would have to build with her own 2 hands. Dawn broke over Redemption Creek, casting long shadows across Virginia's small cabin. She had been awake for hours, first startled from fitful sleep by nightmares, then kept conscious by anxiety about the day ahead. At precisely 7:30, she smoothed her hands over the faded blue work dress she had unearthed from the bottom of her trunk, a remnant from their journey west. Before Thomas had insisted she dress like a proper lady befitting his future status. The irony wasn't lost on her as she secured her hair in a simple bun and splashed water on her face from the basin. Thomas had wanted her to be a society wife, but she would now be loading hides with a cowboy to earn enough for her next meal. A knock sounded at precisely 8 o'clock. Virginia opened the door to find Jack O'Malley standing on her sagging porch, hat in hand. "Morning, Mrs. Warren," he said, his eyes quickly taking in her attire. You look ready for work. I am, Virginia replied, stepping outside and pulling the door closed behind her. Though I should warn you that my experience with ranch work is limited to feeding chickens at my uncle's farm when I was a girl. Jack's wagon stood waiting, his sturdy chestnut mare pawing impatiently at the ground. We all start somewhere, he said with an encouraging smile. And I reckon feeding chickens requires more courage than most men show in a gunfight. The jest surprised a small laugh from Virginia, the sound strange to her own ears after weeks of grief. She accepted Jack's assistance into the wagon, noting the careful way he supported her elbow without presuming to take her hand. As they traveled away from town, the morning sun climbing higher in the clear blue sky, Virginia found herself studying Jack's profile. His jaw was strong, stubbled with a day's growth of beard, and a small scar marked his chin. His eyes, she noticed, were a warm hazel that crinkled at the corners when he spoke. "Have you always been a rancher, Mr. O'Malley?" she asked, breaking the comfortable silence that had fallen between them. Jack shook his head. "Started out mining like most folks who come to these parts. Spent 3 years breaking my back for other men's fortunes before I decided the only hole worth digging was one for fence posts on my own land." "And you prefer it, the ranching life?" Jack considered this as they passed through a stretch of rolling hills dotted with spring wildflowers. "There's something honest about it. Cattle don't lie, don't cheat. They need what they need and they give what they can. It's a fair exchange." He glanced at her. "What about you?" "Did you always see yourself as a miner's wife?" Virginia looked down at her hands, ungloved and already showing the signs of harder work than she'd been raised to expect. "I saw myself as Thomas's wife," she said simply. The particulars seemed unimportant at the time. Jack nodded, not pressing further, and Virginia was grateful for his perception. After about an hour's journey, they crested a hill, and Jack's ranch came into view. It was modest but well-maintained, a small cabin with a stone chimney, a sturdy barn, a corral holding several horses, and beyond, a herd of perhaps 50 cattle grazing in the distance. "It isn't much," Jack said, a note of pride nonetheless evident in his voice, "but it's mine, free and clear." "It is lovely," Virginia replied honestly. After the cramped, dirty mining town, the open space and clean air felt like a luxury. Jack guided the wagon to the barn where several tanned hides were stacked, waiting to be loaded. "Most of these came from hunting to feed myself through winter," he explained. "A few from cattle that didn't make it. Nothing goes to waste out here." Virginia nodded, already rolling up her sleeves. "What would you like me to do?" Jack seemed momentarily surprised by her directness, then smiled. "If you could fold them as I hand them up, we can stack them more efficiently in the wagon." They worked in tandem, Jack lifting the heavy hides and Virginia carefully folding and arranging them. Despite her initial clumsiness, she quickly developed a rhythm, determined not to show weakness or distaste at the rough work. "You're a natural," Jack commented as she efficiently folded a particularly unwieldy hide. Virginia felt a flush of pride at the simple compliment. "My father always said I had good hands for detailed work. He wanted me to become a seamstress." "What did you want?" Jack asked, passing her another hide. The question caught Virginia off guard. Few had ever asked what she wanted. "I wanted to teach," she admitted. "I always loved books, learning. But then I met Thomas, and he had such grand plans." "Seems to me a woman who can read and write would be a blessing in these parts," Jack observed. "Not many folks around here had much schooling." Virginia considered this as they continued working. By midday, the wagon was loaded, and her arms ached pleasantly from the exertion. "Time for a rest," Jack announced, leading her toward the cabin. "Can't sell anything on an empty stomach." The interior of Jack's home was surprisingly tidy for a bachelor's residence. A solid wooden table occupied the center of the main room, bookshelves lined one wall, and a stone fireplace dominated another. Simple curtains framed the windows, and though the furnishings were sparse, everything appeared well crafted and cared for. Virginia's surprise must have shown on her face, for Jack chuckled as he moved to the small kitchen area. "Expected a pigsty, did you?" "Aye. Well, most single men I have encountered are not particularly concerned with domestic matters," Virginia replied diplomatically. Jack shrugged as he stoked the fire in the cook stove. My mother taught all her boys to keep a clean home, said just because we were born male didn't mean we were born helpless. He pulled a loaf of bread and some cheese from a cupboard. It's not much, but it'll keep us going until we get back to town. They ate at the table, the simple fare more satisfying than Virginia would have expected. As Jack poured her a cup of coffee, she found herself studying the bookshelves with interest. "You enjoy reading?" she asked, noting several familiar titles among the collection. "When there's time," Jack replied. "Winter evenings get long out here. A good book helps pass the hours." He hesitated, then added, "You're welcome to borrow any that catch your eye." The offer touched Virginia more than she could express. Books had been her refuge since childhood, but Thomas had considered her reading habit impractical and had gradually discouraged it. "Thank you," she said softly. "I would like that very much." After their meal, they returned to the wagon and set out for town. The journey seemed shorter this time, filled with comfortable conversation about books they had both read, places they had seen, and the changing landscape around them as spring took hold of the Texas countryside. In town, Jack drove directly to the general store where Mr. Peterson, the proprietor, examined the hides with a critical eye before offering a price. Virginia watched as Jack negotiated firmly but fairly, eventually shaking hands on a deal that seemed to satisfy both men. As they left the store, Jack pressed several coins into Virginia's palm. "Your share," he said simply. Virginia stared at the money more than she'd expected for a day's simple work. "This is too much." "It's what you earned," Jack insisted, "and I was thinking I could use help again tomorrow. Got some fence that needs mending, and an extra pair of hands would make the work go faster." Virginia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I would be glad to help." As Jack drove her back to her cabin, the afternoon sun warming her face, Virginia felt something she hadn't experienced in months. Hope, small and fragile but undeniably present. "Same time tomorrow?" Jack asked as he helped her down from the wagon. "I will be ready," Virginia promised, the coins a reassuring weight in her pocket. That night, as she lay in her narrow bed, Virginia found herself thinking not of Thomas and all she had lost, but of Jack O'Malley and the possibility that perhaps, just perhaps, there might still be a future worth building. The next morning dawned clear and promising. Virginia dressed carefully in her work clothes, tying her hair back with a piece of ribbon. She had used some of yesterday's earnings to purchase a small sack of flour and a few eggs, allowing herself a modest breakfast, the first she had truly enjoyed in weeks. When Jack arrived, she was waiting on the porch, a small bundle containing lunch and a book she had noticed on his shelf but hadn't read herself. "You look better today," Jack observed as he helped her into the wagon. "Got some color in your cheeks." Virginia touched her face self-consciously. "A good meal and a night's sleep can work wonders, I suppose." "And honest work," Jack added with a nod. "Nothing restores the spirit like the satisfaction of a job well done." The day passed in a rhythm of physical labor that Virginia found unexpectedly satisfying. Jack taught her to hold fence posts steady while he drove them into the ground, to stretch wire without cutting her hands, and to identify weak spots that needed reinforcing before cattle could find them. They broke for lunch beneath the shade of a massive oak tree, sharing the bread and cheese Virginia had brought along with dried apples from Jack's stores. "You're a quick learner," Jack commented, leaning back against the tree trunk. "Most folks take twice as long to get the hang of fence work." Virginia brushed dust from her skirt, secretly pleased with the compliment. "I have always believed that any task worth doing is worth doing properly." Jack studied her for a moment, his expression thoughtful. "Can I ask you something, Mrs. Warren? After I have spent 2 days helping you with ranch work, I believe you might call me Virginia," she replied with a small smile. Jack's eyes crinkled at the corners. "Virginia, then, and I'm Jack, not Mr. O'Malley." He paused, seemingly gathering his thoughts. "I was wondering what your plans are once you've settled your husband's debts." The question sobered Virginia immediately. "Truthfully, I have not thought beyond survival at present. The banker has given me until the end of the month, which leaves just over 2 weeks to raise enough money." "And how much would that be, if you don't mind my asking?" Virginia hesitated, then decided there was no point in false pride. $87.43. Thomas borrowed against the cabin to finance his last mining venture. Jack whistled low. "That's a considerable sum." Indeed, Virginia agreed, trying to keep the desperation from her voice. I fear the daily work I can do for you, grateful as I am for it, will not be sufficient. Jack was silent for a moment, his gaze fixed on the distant horizon where his cattle grazed. I've been thinking, he said finally. The schoolhouse in town has been empty since Miss Abernathy left to get married last fall. Town council's been looking for someone to teach, but qualified folks are scarce out here. Virginia's heart quickened. Are you suggesting? I'm suggesting you consider it, Jack said, turning back to her. You mentioned you wanted to teach. You're educated, and from what I've seen, you've got the patience for it. Might be worth talking to Mayor Collins. Hope fluttered in Virginia's chest, quickly tempered by reality. Even if the position were offered to me, the salary would not be enough to clear Thomas's debt before the deadline. Jack nodded slowly. I've got a proposition for you then, one that might solve both our problems. Virginia waited, curious despite her wariness. This ranch is more than one man can properly manage alone, Jack continued. I've been thinking of taking on a partner, someone to help with the day-to-day running of things while I focus on expanding the herd. He met her eyes directly. I've got savings, Virginia. Enough to clear your husband's debt with some to spare, Virginia stiffened. I told you before I do not accept charity, and I'm not offering it, Jack replied calmly. What I'm proposing is a business arrangement. I pay off your debt, and in return, you become a partner in this ranch. You'd live here, help with the work, and share in the profits. If you got the teaching position too, that would be your own income to do with as you please. Virginia stared at him, searching for any sign of deception or ulterior motive, but found only straightforward honesty in his gaze. Why would you do this? She asked finally. You barely know me. Jack ran a hand through his hair, looking suddenly uncertain. I reckon I'm a good judge of character. You work hard, you're smart, and you don't complain even when the job's tough. That's rare out here. He paused. And I meant what I said about the ranch being too much for one person. Having a partner would benefit me as much as you. Virginia considered his words carefully. The offer was tempting more than tempting. It was a lifeline when she had been drowning, yet the implications troubled her. People would talk, she said quietly. A widow living alone with a single man. Jack nodded, acknowledging the truth of her concern. They would, but folks around here have more important things to worry about than other people's living arrangements, and you'd have your own room, of course. Complete privacy. I need time to consider, Virginia said finally. This is not a decision to be made lightly. Of course, Jack agreed immediately. Take all the time you need, the offer stands. They returned to their work, the conversation shifting to more practical matters, but Virginia's mind remained focused on Jack's proposition. By the time they returned to town that evening, she had made her decision. I would like to speak with Mayor Collins about the teaching position, she told Jack as they pulled up outside her cabin, and I would like to accept your offer of partnership with one condition. Jack raised an eyebrow questioningly. We draw up a proper contract, Virginia said firmly. With clear terms about my responsibilities, my share of the ranch, and an agreement that I may buy out your investment in my debt over time. I want this to be a true business arrangement, not an obligation I can never repay. A slow smile spread across Jack's face. I expected nothing less from you, Virginia Warren. We'll visit the lawyer tomorrow after you speak with the mayor. Virginia nodded, satisfaction warming her chest. For the first time since Thomas's death, she felt in control of her own destiny. Tomorrow then, she said, extending her hand to seal their agreement. Jack's calloused palm met hers, his grip firm but gentle. Tomorrow, he agreed, his eyes holding a promise that went beyond their spoken arrangement, a promise of respect, of partnership, and perhaps, someday, of something more. As Virginia prepared for bed that night, she found herself wondering what Thomas would think of her decision. He had always protected her, sheltered her from the harsh realities of frontier life. In death, he had inadvertently forced her to confront those realities head-on and discover a strength within herself she hadn't known existed. I am finding my way, Thomas, she whispered to the empty room. I hope you can understand. For the first time since his passing, the silence that answered didn't feel quite so empty. The next morning, Virginia dressed with particular care in her one good dress that wasn't black morning attire, a modest blue cotton that brought out the color of her eyes. She arranged her hair neatly, pinning it in a simple but elegant style that spoke of competence rather than vanity. Jack arrived promptly at 9, dressed more formally than she had yet seen him in a clean white shirt and dark vest. "Ready to face the mayor?" he asked with an encouraging smile. Virginia nodded, gripping her small reticule tightly. Inside was her teaching certificate from Boston, yellowed with age but still valid, and a letter of recommendation from the headmistress of the girls' school where she had briefly taught before marrying Thomas. Mayor Collins received them in his office above the bank, a portly man with intelligent eyes and a businessman's assessment of value. Virginia presented her credentials and spoke passionately about her desire to educate the children of Redemption Creek. "Mrs. Warren, your qualifications are impressive," the mayor acknowledged, "but I must be frank. The town can only offer $15 a month for the position. Most of our families are miners or ranchers, and funds are limited." "I understand," Virginia replied calmly. "I would also propose to offer evening classes for adults wishing to improve their reading and arithmetic, perhaps for a small additional fee." The mayor's eyebrows rose appreciatively at her initiative. "That could certainly be arranged. We have many in town who would benefit from such instruction." He stroked his beard thoughtfully. "When could you begin?" "Next Monday, if that is agreeable," Virginia answered, her heart racing with excitement despite her composed exterior. "Very well, Mrs. Warren, the position is yours. Miss Abernathy left her teaching materials in the schoolhouse, so you'll have something to start with." Mayor Collins rose, extending his hand. "Welcome to your new position." As they left the mayor's office, Virginia could hardly contain her elation. "I cannot believe it happened so easily," she confessed to Jack as they walked toward the lawyer's office. "Nothing about it was easy," Jack corrected gently. "You earned that position with years of education and experience." The mayor recognized quality when he saw it. Virginia felt a warm glow at his words. Thomas had rarely praised her accomplishments, always more focused on his own ambitions. At the lawyer's office, Mr. Garrison drew up a meticulous contract outlining the terms of their partnership. Jack would pay Virginia's debt to the bank, receiving in exchange a partial ownership of her cabin in town and her labor and partnership at the ranch. Virginia would retain the right to purchase back Jack's interest over time at a fair interest rate and would receive 30% of the ranch's profits in recognition of her work. "This seems unusually generous, Mr. O'Malley," the lawyer commented as he reviewed the terms. Jack shrugged. "Fair compensation for fair work. Mrs. Warren will earn every penny." When the papers were signed and witnessed, Virginia felt a curious mixture of relief and trepidation. She was now bound to Jack O'Malley in a business partnership that would fundamentally change her life. "We should visit the bank," Jack said as they left the lawyer's office. "Get that debt settled once and for all." Blackburn's face when Jack counted out the full amount owed was a study in thwarted avarice. The banker had clearly been anticipating foreclosure on Virginia's property and seemed personally offended by her ability to settle the debt. "I trust this concludes our business, Mr. Blackburn," Virginia said coolly as she accepted the receipt for payment. Blackburn's lips thinned to a bloodless line. "Indeed, Mrs. Warren, though I must say I'm surprised at how quickly you've found alternative arrangements after your husband's passing." Jack stepped forward, his expression hardening. "Mrs. Warren and I have a business arrangement, Mr. Blackburn. One that's been properly documented by Mr. Garrison. I'd suggest you mind your insinuations when speaking about a lady." The banker retreated behind his desk. "No offense intended, of course. Good day to you both." Outside the bank, Virginia released a shaky breath. "That man has always made my skin crawl. Some folks can't understand a relationship that isn't about taking advantage," Jack observed. "Makes them suspicious when they see honest dealing." They spent the remainder of the day making arrangements. Virginia would move to the ranch on Saturday, bringing her personal belongings and whatever household items might be useful. The cabin in town would be kept as her official residence for propriety's sake, and for use on school nights when returning to the ranch might be impractical. By the time Jack dropped her at her cabin that evening, Virginia was exhausted but filled with a sense of purpose she hadn't felt in years. "Get some rest," Jack advised as he bid her good night. "Tomorrow we'll need to prepare the ranch for your arrival." The spare room needs a woman's touch, I expect. Virginia smiled, already envisioning how she might transform the space into her own. I will be ready at 8, as usual. That night, she sat at her small table and wrote in her journal for the first time since Thomas's illness began. Today marks the beginning of a new chapter, she wrote. I am not the woman I was when I came west with Thomas, full of naive dreams and dependent on his protection. Grief has reshaped me, hardened some edges while softening others. I do not know what the future holds with this partnership, this new position, this unfamiliar independence. But for the first time in longer than I can remember, I am curious to find out. Saturday dawned bright and clear, a perfect spring day for new beginnings. Virginia had spent the previous days packing her belongings, sorting through the accumulated possessions of her marriage. Some items she set aside to sell, others to keep, and still others, Thomas's personal effects, she carefully stored in a trunk that Jack promised could remain in the ranch's attic until she decided what to do with them. The process had been both painful and liberating, each object a memory, each decision a small step toward her new life. Jack arrived with his wagon, and together they loaded her belongings. Virginia took a final walk through the cabin that had been her home, touching the walls that had witnessed her grief, her fear, and finally, her decision to move forward. Ready? Jack asked softly from the doorway. Virginia nodded, closing the door behind her without looking back. The ranch welcomed her with golden afternoon light spilling across the rolling pastures. Jack had cleaned the spare bedroom meticulously, even adding a vase of wildflowers on the small dresser. The gesture touched Virginia deeply. It's perfect, she told him as she set her carpetbag on the bed. Thank you. I want you to feel at home here, Jack replied simply. This is your place now, too. The words settled around Virginia like a comfortable shawl, home. It had been so long since anywhere had truly felt like home. The following days established a routine that suited them both. They rose early, sharing breakfast and discussing the day's tasks. Virginia quickly learned the rhythm of ranch life, feeding chickens and collecting eggs, helping with fence repairs, even assisting with the cattle when an extra hand was needed. In the evenings, they would sit by the fire, sometimes reading in comfortable silence, other times sharing stories of their lives before Redemption Creek. Virginia learned that Jack had lost his parents to influenza 5 years earlier, that he had 2 brothers who had settled in Oregon, and that he had once dreamed of becoming a doctor before life led him west instead. In turn, she told him about her childhood in Boston, her brief teaching career, and how she had met Thomas at a lecture on the opportunities of the Western frontier. He painted such a vivid picture, Virginia remembered, staring into the flames. Golden hills, endless opportunity, fortunes waiting to be made. I was swept away by his vision. And now, Jack asked quietly, do you regret coming west? Virginia considered the question carefully. No, she said finally. Despite everything, I do not regret it. The West has stripped away many illusions, but in doing so, it has shown me my own strength. I could never have discovered that in Boston. Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. The frontier has a way of revealing what's truly inside a person, good or bad. On Monday morning, Virginia faced her first day of teaching with a mixture of excitement and trepidation. Jack drove her to town early, helping her open the schoolhouse and arrange the desks that had sat empty for months. You'll do fine, he assured her as children began arriving, eyeing their new teacher with curious glances. Just be yourself. By the end of that first day, Virginia was exhausted but exhilarated. 15 students ranging from 6 to 16 years old had filled the small schoolhouse, their abilities as varied as their ages. Some could barely recognize their letters, while others showed remarkable aptitude for mathematics or history. When Jack arrived to collect her, she bubbled over with stories of the day's successes and challenges. I had forgotten how much I loved teaching, she admitted as they rode back to the ranch. Watching a child's face when understanding dawns, there's nothing quite like it. Jack smiled, clearly pleased by her enthusiasm. Sounds like you found your calling again. Spring melted into summer, and Virginia settled into her dual roles as teacher and rancher with increasing confidence. The evening classes for adults proved popular, particularly among the miners who wished to better understand their contracts and account books. Virginia found herself respected not just as a teacher, but as a businesswoman with a stake in one of the area's promising ranches. Her partnership with Jack deepened into a friendship that surprised her with its ease and comfort. They worked well together, her organizational skills complementing his practical knowledge, her patience balancing his occasional impulsiveness. Yet as the weeks passed, Virginia became aware of a shift in their relationship, subtle glances that lingered, an increased awareness of his presence, a quickening of her pulse when their hands accidentally touched. She tried to dismiss these feelings as inappropriate, even disloyal to Thomas's memory, but they persisted nonetheless. One evening in late July, they sat on the porch watching a spectacular sunset paint the sky in shades of crimson and gold. Virginia had been unusually quiet, preoccupied with a letter she had received from Thomas's sister in Philadelphia, gently suggesting it might be time for Virginia to consider returning east to live with family. "Something troubling you?" Jack asked, his voice cutting through her thoughts. Virginia sighed, deciding honesty was best. "I received a letter today. Thomas's sister believes I should return to Philadelphia, that living alone on the frontier is unbecoming for a woman of my background." Jack's expression remained carefully neutral. "And what do you think about that?" "I think she means well," Virginia replied slowly. "She cannot imagine the life I have built here teaching, working on the ranch. She still sees me as the sheltered Boston girl who followed her husband west." She turned to look directly at Jack, "But that woman no longer exists." Relief flickered across Jack's features. "So you're planning to stay in Redemption Creek?" "This is my home now," Virginia said simply. "I have work that matters, students who depend on me, a partnership in a growing ranch." She hesitated. "And I have friends here." Jack nodded, his gaze returning to the sunset. After a long moment, he spoke again, his voice lower than before. "Virginia, there's something I've been wanting to ask you." Her heart skipped a beat at his serious tone. "Yes. The harvest dance is coming up next month. I was wondering if you might consider attending, with me." He hurried on before she could respond, not as business partners but as a gentleman escorting a lady he admires greatly. Virginia felt heat rise to her cheeks, grateful for the dimming light that hid her blush. "Jack, I am still in mourning." "I understand," he said quickly. "It was presumptuous of me to ask. Please forget I did not say no," Virginia interrupted gently. "I merely stated a fact. The traditional mourning period is 1 year, and it has been only 4 months since Thomas passed." Jack turned to face her fully. "I would never ask you to dishonor your husband's memory, Virginia, but I also believe that life is unpredictable and often too short. We must find happiness where and when we can." Virginia studied his earnest face, seeing there the man who had offered his hand when she stood alone at a grave, not out of pity, but out of genuine kindness and respect. "People will talk," she said, echoing her concern from months ago. "Let them," Jack replied with a shrug. "We know the truth of our relationship. That's what matters." Virginia took a deep breath, her decision made. "Very well, Mr. O'Malley. I would be honored to attend the harvest dance with you." Jack's smile was like the breaking of dawn. "Thank you, Mrs. Warren. I promise you won't regret it." As darkness settled over the ranch and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, Virginia wondered if Thomas could see her from wherever he was. She hoped he would understand that in accepting Jack's invitation, she wasn't betraying their love, but rather embracing the chance to live fully again, something Thomas, with all his dreams and ambitions, would surely have wanted for her. The weeks leading up to the harvest dance passed in a flurry of activity. August brought the first cattle sale of the season, with Jack and Virginia driving 20 head to the railroad town 30 miles away. The price they received exceeded expectations, validating their partnership and hard work. "We should celebrate," Jack suggested as they returned to the ranch, pockets considerably heavier than when they'd left. Virginia smiled, her cheeks flushed with success. "What did you have in mind?" "I was thinking we might use some of these profits to purchase material for a new dress." "For the dance," Jack added, suddenly appearing almost shy. "Unless that seems frivolous." The suggestion touched Virginia deeply. She had been wondering how to approach the dance, with her only formal attire being her black morning dress, which seemed inappropriate for such a festive occasion. "That would be lovely," she admitted, "though I insist it come from my share of the profits." Jack's grin widened. Naturally, we're business partners after all. The following Saturday, they rode into town together. While Jack attended to ranch business, Virginia visited Mrs. Henderson's dry goods and millinery, where she selected a rich blue fabric that reminded her of the summer sky. Mrs. Henderson, a cheerful widow who had taken Virginia under her wing since her arrival in Redemption Creek, offered to help with the sewing. "So, Mrs. Henderson said casually as she measured Virginia for the new dress, "You and Mr. O'Malley seem to have formed quite a partnership." Virginia maintained a composed expression despite the knowing look in the older woman's eyes. "Yes, the ranch is doing quite well under our combined management, Mrs. Henderson hummed noncommittally. "He's a good man, Jack O'Malley, honest, hardworking, not like some who blow through town full of big talk and empty pockets." Virginia recognized the gentle comparison to Thomas but felt no offense. It was true, after all. "Mr. O'Malley has been very kind to me during a difficult time." "Kind, yes," Mrs. Henderson agreed, pinning the fabric carefully. "But there's more than kindness in the way that man looks at you when you're not watching." Heat rose to Virginia's cheeks. "Mrs. Henderson, I assure you—" "Oh, no need for assurances, dear," the older woman interrupted with a smile. "Life is for the living, and you're still a young woman with many years ahead. Thomas would want you to find happiness again." It was the first time anyone in town had spoken so directly about the possibility of Virginia moving forward romantically, and the lack of judgment in Mrs. Henderson's tone was unexpectedly freeing. "I am not certain what the future holds," Virginia said carefully. "But I am grateful for your understanding." Mrs. Henderson patted her hand. "The heart knows its own time, my dear. No need to rush it along or hold it back." When Virginia emerged from the shop later, the dress arrangements complete, she found Jack waiting for her outside the general store, deep in conversation with Sheriff Davis. Both men looked up at her approach, and Virginia couldn't help noticing the way Jack's expression brightened. "Everything settled with the dress?" he asked as they walked toward the wagon. Virginia nodded. "Mrs. Henderson is a miracle worker. It should be ready in time for the dance." Jack helped her into the wagon, his hand lingering on hers a moment longer than strictly necessary. "I'm looking forward to it," he said quietly. The ride back to the ranch was filled with comfortable conversation, but Virginia found herself increasingly aware of Jack's proximity, the timbre of his voice, the way sunlight caught in his hair. These feelings both excited and troubled her. Was it disloyal to Thomas to find herself attracted to another man so soon after his death? Or was it, as Mrs. Henderson suggested, simply the natural course of a heart healing and opening to new possibilities? That evening, as they sat at the kitchen table going over the ranch accounts, Virginia found herself studying Jack's profile, the strong line of his jaw, the tiny scar near his left eyebrow that she now knew came from being thrown from a horse as a boy, the way his forehead creased slightly when he concentrated. "Something wrong?" Jack asked, catching her gaze. Virginia shook her head quickly. "Just thinking about how much has changed since the day we met." Jack set down his pencil. "For the better, I hope." "Yes," Virginia admitted, "though the path has not been what I expected." She hesitated, then added, "When Thomas died, I thought my life was over. I could not imagine a future without him, without the dreams we had shared." Jack listened attentively, his expression serious. "I still miss him," Virginia continued. "I still grieve for what might have been. But I have also discovered that life continues, that new dreams can form alongside memories of the old ones." "You're one of the strongest people I've ever met, Virginia," Jack said softly. "Not many could have faced what you did and emerged with such grace." Virginia smiled sadly. "Not strength so much as necessity. When there is no choice but to continue, one simply continues." Jack reached across the table, his hand covering hers. "You give yourself too little credit." The warmth of his touch sent a current through Virginia that she couldn't ignore. Confused by the intensity of her reaction, she gently withdrew her hand. "It's getting late," she said, rising from the table. "And tomorrow is Sunday. I should prepare my lesson for the adults' evening class." Jack nodded, accepting her retreat without comment. "Good night, Virginia." "Good night, Jack." In her room, Virginia sat on the edge of her bed, her emotions in turmoil. She could no longer deny her growing feelings for Jack O'Malley, but acknowledging them brought a complex mixture of guilt, excitement, and fear. Thomas had been her first love, her husband, the man whose dreams had shaped her life for years. His death had left a void she had never expected to fill. Yet here she was, her heart quickening at another man's touch, her thoughts increasingly occupied by his smile, his kindness, his quiet strength. "What would you have me do, Thomas?" she whispered into the darkness. "Am I betraying you by feeling this way, or would you want me to grasp this chance at happiness?" No answer came, of course, but as Virginia prepared for bed, she felt a curious sense of peace settle over her. Perhaps that was answer enough. The day of the harvest dance arrived with perfect late summer weather, warm sunshine tempered by a cool breeze that hinted at the approaching fall. Virginia spent the morning teaching as usual, but dismissed her students early, much to their delight. Mrs. Henderson had delivered the finished dress the previous day, and Virginia had hidden it carefully in her room at the ranch. Now, as she prepared for the evening, she found herself more nervous than she had anticipated. The dress was beautiful, simpler than the elaborate fashions she had worn in Boston, but far more elegant than her everyday attire. The rich blue fabric complemented her fair complexion and brought out the color of her eyes. She arranged her hair in a more sophisticated style than her usual practical bun, allowing a few soft curls to frame her face. When she finally emerged from her room, she found Jack waiting in the main room, dressed in his best clothes, a dark suit that fit his broad shoulders perfectly, a crisp white shirt, and a string tie. He had trimmed his beard and slicked back his hair, transforming from rugged rancher to handsome gentleman. He turned at the sound of her footsteps, and the expression that crossed his face made Virginia's heart skip a beat. "Virginia," he said softly, his eyes taking in every detail of her appearance, "you look absolutely beautiful." A blush warmed her cheeks. "Thank you, you look quite handsome yourself." Jack offered his arm with a formal bow that made her smile. "Shall we, Mrs. Warren?" The town hall had been transformed for the occasion with autumn decorations, dried corn stalks in the corners, wreaths of colorful leaves, tables laden with harvest fruits and home-baked goods. A small band played lively tunes in one corner, and couples already filled the dance floor. Their entrance caused a brief lull in conversation as heads turned to observe them. Virginia felt a moment of anxiety, acutely aware of the speculation their appearance together would generate. But Jack's steady presence beside her gave her courage, and she lifted her chin, meeting the curious gazes with a composed smile. Mayor Collins approached them immediately, his wife on his arm. "Mrs. Warren, Mr. O'Malley, delighted you could join us. The school board was just discussing your excellent work with the children, Mrs. Warren. Remarkable improvement in just a few months." Virginia thanked him graciously, relieved by the professional nature of the conversation. As more townspeople greeted them, she realized that while there was certainly curiosity about their relationship, there was also genuine respect for what they had accomplished, she as a teacher, Jack as a rancher, and together as business partners who had made a success of their venture. "Would you care to dance?" Jack asked as the band struck up a waltz. Virginia hesitated only briefly before nodding. "I would like that very much." Jack led her onto the dance floor with surprising grace. His hand rested lightly at her waist, respectful yet intimate, as he guided her through the steps of the waltz. "You dance well," Virginia observed, surprised by his skill. Jack smiled. "My mother insisted all her sons learn. Said no woman would tolerate a man who couldn't properly escort her around a dance floor." "A wise woman," Virginia replied, increasingly aware of how perfectly they moved together, how natural it felt to be in his arms. As the evening progressed, they danced several more times, shared refreshments, and conversed with their neighbors. Virginia found herself genuinely enjoying the celebration, her earlier anxiety forgotten in the pleasure of the moment. During a break in the dancing, they stepped outside for some fresh air. The night was clear, stars scattered like diamonds across the velvet sky, a crescent moon casting silver light over the town. "Are you enjoying yourself?" Jack asked as they strolled along the quiet street. "Very much," Virginia admitted. "More than I expected to." Truthfully, Jack's expression grew serious. "Virginia, there's something I need to tell you, something I've been thinking about for some time now." Her pulse quickened at his tone. "Yes," he took a deep breath. "These past months, working alongside you, getting to know you, they've been the happiest of my life. You're not just my business partner, you've become my closest friend, someone I respect and admire more than anyone I've ever known." Virginia stood very still, scarcely breathing as he continued. "I understand it may be too soon, that you're still grieving Thomas, and I would never ask you to set aside those feelings." Jack took her hands gently in his. "But I want you to know that my feelings for you have grown far beyond friendship or business partnership. When you're ready, if you're ever ready, I hope, you might consider a different kind of partnership between us." The sincerity in his eyes took Virginia's breath away. This was no impulsive declaration, but a thoughtfully considered profession of genuine feeling. "Jack," she began, her voice barely above a whisper, "I would be lying if I said I had not thought about it as well. My feelings for you have evolved in ways I never expected." Hope brightened his features, but he remained silent, allowing her to continue. "Thomas will always be part of my past, part of who I am," Virginia said carefully. "But these months with you have shown me that there can be a future beyond grief, that the heart can heal and love again." The word hung between them, charged with meaning. "Are you saying," Jack began. Virginia squeezed his hands gently. "I am saying that I need a little more time. Not to decide how I feel, I know that already, but to honor the past properly before embracing the future fully." Jack nodded, understanding in his eyes. "I would wait for you forever, Virginia Warren." The simple declaration moved her deeply. Without thinking, Virginia rose on her tiptoes and pressed a gentle kiss to his cheek, her lips lingering just long enough to convey her feelings without words. When they returned to the dance, something had shifted between them, an acknowledgement of feelings, a promise of possibilities, a bridge between past and future that both honored what had been and celebrated what might be. As autumn painted the landscape in hues of gold and crimson, Virginia and Jack settled into a new rhythm. Their partnership at the ranch continued to flourish, their friendship deepened, and their unspoken understanding gave them both the freedom to let their relationship evolve naturally. Virginia threw herself into her teaching with renewed enthusiasm. The town council, impressed by her results, voted to increase her salary and provide additional funds for books and supplies. Her adult education classes had expanded to 3 evenings a week, with even Mr. Blackburn reluctantly acknowledging their value to the community. At the ranch, Virginia had truly made herself at home. The spare room was now unmistakably hers, decorated with small touches that reflected her personality, books lining the shelves, a handmade quilt on the bed, wildflowers in a jar on the windowsill. She had transformed the kitchen as well, introducing organized storage systems and regular meals that made the bachelor's cabin feel like a proper home. One crisp October morning, Virginia stood at the corral fence watching Jack break a young mare, admiring his patience and skill with the nervous animal. She had learned to ride herself over the past months, though she still preferred the steady gelding Jack had selected for her rather than the spirited horses he favored. "She's coming along nicely," Jack commented as he led the mare back to the barn, patting her neck approvingly. "Another week and she'll be ready for proper training." Virginia smiled, enjoying the pride in his voice. "You have a gift with horses, they trust you." "It's all about respect," Jack replied, removing the mare's bridle. "Horses know when you respect them, same as people." As they walked back to the house together, Virginia was struck by how comfortable their companionship had become, the easy conversation, the shared understanding, the small daily rituals that had woven their lives together. "I received a letter from the school board today," she said as they entered the kitchen. "They've asked me to consider taking on the position permanently with a formal contract for the coming year." Jack looked up from washing his hands at the basin. "That's wonderful news. Will you accept?" Virginia nodded. "I believe I will. The work is rewarding, and the additional income has allowed me to repay a significant portion of my debt to you already." A shadow crossed Jack's face at the mention of the debt. "Virginia, you know I never considered that money." "I know," she interrupted gently. "But it matters to me to honor our agreement. It was the foundation of our partnership, after all." Jack dried his hands on a towel, his expression thoughtful. "Speaking of our partnership, I've been meaning to discuss something with you." Virginia busied herself preparing coffee, suddenly nervous about his serious tone. "Yes, winter will be here before we know it," Jack began, leaning against the counter. The ranch is doing well enough that I've been thinking about some improvements to the house. Adding another room, perhaps, and expanding the kitchen. Virginia turned to face him, surprised by the suggestion. That seems sensible. The space is somewhat limited for two people. Jack's gaze held her steadily. That's just it, Virginia. I've been thinking about more than just two people. Her heart began to race as she understood his meaning. Jack, it's been 6 months since Thomas passed, he continued quietly. I know that's not the full mourning period, and I respect that you wanted time, but I also know how I feel about you, and I believe I know how you feel about me. Virginia set down the coffee pot, her hands trembling slightly. I care for you deeply, Jack, more than I ever thought possible. Encouragement flickered in his eyes. Then maybe it's time we discussed what happens next, not just as business partners, but as a man and a woman who have found something precious together. Virginia took a deep breath, her thoughts racing. She had known this conversation was inevitable, had felt it approaching in the lingering glances, the accidental touches that no longer seemed so accidental, the quiet evenings by the fire that stretched longer each night before they reluctantly parted to their separate rooms. What are you proposing exactly? She asked, her voice barely above a whisper. Jack moved closer, close enough that she could feel the warmth radiating from him. I'm proposing that when you're ready, truly ready, I would like to court you properly, Virginia Warren. And if that courtship proves as successful as our business partnership, I would like to ask you to be my wife. The word hung in the air between them, wife. A title Virginia had worn before, a commitment she had made and honored until death had severed it. The thought of taking it on again was both terrifying and exhilarating. You don't need to answer now, Jack added quickly, seeing the conflict in her expression. I just wanted you to know my intentions are honorable and my feelings are sincere. Virginia reached up to touch his face, her fingers tracing the line of his jaw. Jack O'Malley, you are the most honorable man I have ever known, and my feelings for you are just as sincere. Hope blazed in his eyes. Does that mean it means, Virginia said carefully, that I would welcome your courtship, and that I believe when the time is right, my answer to your future question will make us both very happy. Jack's smile was radiant. Slowly, giving her every opportunity to pull away, he leaned down and brushed his lips against hers in the gentlest of kisses. Virginia closed her eyes, allowing herself to fully experience the moment, the softness of his lips, the faint scent of soap and leather that was uniquely Jack, the way her heart seemed to expand in her chest until she thought it might burst with feeling. When they parted, both somewhat breathless, Jack rested his forehead against hers. I've been wanting to do that since the harvest dance, he admitted. Virginia smiled, a new lightness filling her. I've been wanting you to. The winter of 1878 proved to be one of the mildest in recent memory, as if nature itself approved of the blossoming relationship between Virginia and Jack. True to his word, Jack began courting her properly, bringing small gifts when he returned from town, arranging for them to attend church together each Sunday, and even organizing a Christmas party at the ranch for Virginia's students and their families. The expansion of the house progressed steadily, with Jack and several hired hands working through the winter months to add a larger kitchen, a proper dining room, and an additional bedroom. Virginia understood the significance of these improvements. Jack was building not just for the present, but for a future he hoped they would share. Their courtship was a curious blend of the traditional and the practical. Unlike her courtship with Thomas, which had consisted primarily of chaperoned visits and formal outings, her relationship with Jack was built on shared work, mutual respect, and the deep friendship that had developed between them over months of partnership. By early spring, Virginia had fully repaid her debt to Jack, using her teaching salary and her share of the ranch profits. The transaction should have been merely financial, but it held deeper significance for them. Both Virginia was now his equal in every sense, free to make her own choices about their future together. On a perfect April morning, exactly 1 year after Thomas's death, Virginia rode with Jack to the cemetery on the hill outside town. She carried a small bouquet of wildflowers, gathered from the meadows surrounding the ranch. Would you prefer to be alone? Jack asked as they reached the cemetery gates. Virginia shook her head. No, I would like you with me if you don't mind. Together they walked to Thomas's grave, where the wooden cross had been replaced by a simple stone marker. Virginia knelt to place the flowers, her fingers tracing the carved letters of her first husband's name. "Hello, Thomas," she said softly. "It's been a year since you left. So much has changed." She paused, gathering her thoughts. "I want you to know that I honored our marriage and I mourned your passing with all my heart. But I've also found a way to continue living, to find joy again in this world you brought me to." Jack stood respectfully behind her, his hat in his hands, allowing her this moment of closure. "I will always carry a part of you with me," Virginia continued. "But it's time now for me to look forward, not back. I hope wherever you are, you can understand and be happy for me." She rose slowly, brushing dirt from her skirt. Jack offered his hand and she took it, their fingers intertwining naturally. "Thank you," she said as they walked back to the horses, "for understanding why I needed to do that." Jack squeezed her hand gently. "Of course. He was an important part of your life, Virginia. That doesn't change just because—" He hesitated. "Just because I've fallen in love with you," Virginia finished for him, the words coming easily now that she had made her peace with the past. Jack stopped walking, turning to face her fully. "Have you, truly?" Virginia nodded, her heart light despite the solemnity of the day. "I have, completely and without reservation." Joy transformed Jack's features. In one fluid motion, he dropped to one knee before her, still holding her hand in his. "Virginia Warren, I had planned to do this differently, with a proper dinner and flowers and all the things a woman deserves, but I can't wait another moment." He reached into his pocket and withdrew a small velvet box. "I've been carrying this with me for weeks, waiting for the right time." Virginia's free hand flew to her mouth as he opened the box to reveal a delicate gold ring set with a small, perfect diamond. "I love you more than I ever thought possible," Jack continued, his voice steady despite the emotion evident in his eyes. "You came into my life when I least expected it, and you've made every day since brighter by your presence. Would you do me the extraordinary honor of becoming my wife?" Tears blurred Virginia's vision, but they were tears of joy, not grief. In this moment, on this hillside where she had once stood alone in despair, she found herself filled with hope for the future with this good, kind man who had offered his hand when she had nothing. "Yes," she whispered, then more strongly, "Yes, Jack O'Malley, I will marry you." Jack slipped the ring onto her finger, then stood and gathered her into his arms, his kiss conveying all the love and promise that words could not express. As they rode back to the ranch, their ranch, Virginia felt as though her life had come full circle. She had traveled west following one man's dreams, only to discover her own strength and build her own dreams alongside a man who valued her as an equal partner. "What are you thinking?" Jack asked, noticing her thoughtful expression. Virginia smiled, the diamond on her finger catching the spring sunlight. "I was thinking about journeys, how the one I thought I was taking led me somewhere entirely different, somewhere better than I could have imagined." Jack reached across to take her hand. "Our journey's just beginning, Virginia. I cannot wait to see where it leads," she replied, her heart full of love for the man beside her and the life they would build together. The wedding took place in June, when the Texas landscape was lush with greenery and wildflowers bloomed in profusion across the ranch's rolling pastures. Virginia had insisted on a simple ceremony with only the townspeople of Redemption Creek in attendance, and Jack had readily agreed, understanding her desire to keep the occasion intimate and meaningful rather than elaborate. Mrs. Henderson had outdone herself, creating Virginia's wedding dress, a confection of ivory silk with delicate lace at the collar and cuffs. Elegant, but practical enough to be worn again for special occasions. Virginia's only jewelry was her engagement ring and a string of pearls that had belonged to her mother, sent from Boston by her brother who, though unable to attend, had written his wholehearted approval of the match. The ceremony was held on the ranch, beneath the sprawling oak tree where they had shared lunch on Virginia's second day of work. Pastor Miller officiated, his words emphasizing not just the joining of two people in matrimony, but the culmination of a partnership already proven through shared work, mutual respect, and deep affection. "Do you, Jackson O'Malley, take this woman to be your lawfully wedded wife?" Pastor Miller asked, his voice carrying across the assembled guests, Jack's eyes never left Virginia's as he answered, "I do, with all my heart." "And do you, Virginia Warren, take this man to be your lawfully wedded husband?" Virginia smiled, thinking of how far she had come from that desolate day at the cemetery. "I do," she replied clearly. "Then by the authority vested in me, I now pronounce you husband and wife." Pastor Miller beamed at the couple. "Mr. O'Malley, you may kiss your bride." Jack drew Virginia into his arms with a tenderness that moved her deeply. Their kiss was brief but heartfelt, a promise exchanged before their friends and neighbors that sealed their commitment to one another. The celebration that followed was joyous tables laden with food contributed by every household in Redemption Creek, music provided by the same small band that had played at the harvest dance, children running and playing among the adults who danced and feasted well into the evening. As twilight descended, lanterns were lit around the yard, casting a warm glow over the festivities. Virginia found a moment of quiet to observe the scene. Jack deep in conversation with Mayor Collins, Mrs. Henderson directing the serving of wedding cake, her students performing an impromptu recitation they had prepared as a surprise wedding gift. "You look happy, Mrs. O'Malley," Sheriff Davis commented, approaching with a cup of punch for her. The new name startled Virginia momentarily, then settled around her like a comfortable embrace. "I am, Sheriff, happier than I ever expected to be again." "You deserve it," he replied sincerely. "Both of you do. This town's better for having you in it." As the sheriff moved away, Jack appeared at Virginia's side, slipping an arm around her waist. "Ready to say goodbye to our guests, wife?" he murmured in her ear. "They've prepared quite a send-off." Indeed, the townspeople had arranged themselves in two lines leading from the celebration to the newly expanded house, holding lanterns aloft to light the couple's way. As Virginia and Jack walked between them, cheers and well wishes filled the air, along with handfuls of flower petals tossed by the schoolchildren. At the threshold of their home now, Jack surprised Virginia by sweeping her into his arms and carrying her across, to the delight of the onlookers. "Welcome home, Mrs. O'Malley," he said softly as he set her down in the privacy of their front room. Virginia reached up to caress his face, overwhelmed by the love she felt for this man who had rebuilt her world when it had crumbled around her. "I never thought I could be this happy again," she confessed. "You have given me so much more than a hand to hold or a roof over my head, Jack. You've given me a future I can believe in." Jack's eyes shone with emotion as he drew her close. "And you've given me a partner to share it with, the greatest gift I could ever receive." Their lips met in a kiss that deepened with the knowledge that they had all the time in the world, that this night was just the beginning of their life together. Later, as moonlight filtered through the bedroom curtains, Virginia lay in Jack's arms, her head resting on his chest, listening to the steady rhythm of his heartbeat. His fingers traced lazy patterns on her bare shoulder, and contentment wrapped around them like a blanket. "What are you thinking?" Jack asked, pressing a kiss to the top of her head. Virginia smiled in the darkness. "I was thinking about that day at the cemetery, how lost I felt, how alone, and then you appeared, offering your hand and a simple meal." She propped herself up on one elbow to look into his face. "Did you know then that we would end up here?" Jack brushed a strand of hair from her face tenderly. "I knew there was something special about you, a strength beneath your grief that called to something in me. But this—" He gestured to encompass their entwined bodies, their shared bed, their joined lives. "This I hoped for but never dared expect." Virginia settled back against him, drawing the sheet over them both. "Life has a way of surprising us, doesn't it? Taking us down paths we never anticipated." "Some surprises are better than others," Jack murmured, his voice growing drowsy. "You, Virginia O'Malley, are the best surprise of my life." As her husband drifted into sleep beside her, Virginia remained awake a little longer, savoring the perfect happiness of the moment. From the window, she could see the stars scattered across the Texas sky, the same stars that had witnessed her despair a year ago, now bearing witness to her joy. Life on the frontier had stripped away her illusions, tested her resolve, and ultimately revealed her true strength. In losing everything, she had found herself. And in finding herself, she had found a love deeper and truer than anything she had known before. Virginia closed her eyes, secure in Jack's embrace and in the knowledge that whatever challenges tomorrow might bring, They would face them together, equal partners in the adventure of building a life on the wild, beautiful frontier they both now called home. 5 years later, Virginia stood on the porch of the O'Malley ranch house, watching as Jack taught their 4-year-old son, Thomas, to ride his first pony. Their 2-year-old daughter, Elizabeth, played contentedly at Virginia's feet, arranging pebbles in careful patterns that made sense only to her. The ranch had prospered beyond their expectations, expanding to 3 times its original size. The herd now numbered over 200 head of cattle, and Jack had developed a reputation for breeding some of the finest horses in the territory. Virginia continued to teach at the school in Redemption Creek, which had grown from a single room to a proper building with separate classrooms for different age groups. Life had not been without challenges. A drought 2 years ago had threatened the herd, and Elizabeth's difficult birth had frightened them both. But they had weathered each storm together, their partnership strengthened by shared hardship as much as by shared joy. Virginia smiled as Thomas let out a whoop of delight when the pony trotted obediently in a circle, Jack's steady hand on the lead rope ensuring his son's safety while allowing him to feel the thrill of accomplishment. "Mama, look," Thomas called, his face alight with pride. "I'm riding just like Papa." "I see you, darling," Virginia called back. "You're doing wonderfully." Jack glanced up, catching her eye across the yard. Even after 5 years of marriage, that look still sent a warm current through Virginia's body. Love and desire and deep appreciation all mingled together. Later that evening, after the children were asleep, Virginia and Jack sat on the porch watching the sunset, a ritual they had maintained since their earliest days together. "I had a letter from the state education board today," Virginia said, breaking their comfortable silence. "They've asked me to help develop a standardized curriculum for rural schools throughout Texas." Jack turned to her, pride evident in his expression. "That's a tremendous honor, Virginia. Will you accept?" She nodded. "I believe I will." It would mean some travel to Austin periodically, but the opportunity to shape education across the state. Her voice trailed off, still somewhat awed by the recognition her teaching methods had received. "You should do it," Jack said without hesitation. "The children and I can manage while you're away, and just think of all the young minds you'll help shape not just in Redemption Creek, but throughout Texas." Virginia reached for his hand, overwhelmed by his unwavering support. "Do you remember what you said to me that first day at the cemetery?" "That things have a way of working themselves out if given time," Jack nodded, intertwining his fingers with hers. "I remember. You were right," Virginia said softly, "though I never imagined they would work out quite like this." She gestured toward their expanded home, the thriving ranch, the evidence of their shared success surrounding them. Jack brought her hand to his lips, pressing a kiss to her knuckles. "When I offered you my hand that day, I was just trying to help a grieving widow find her next meal. I had no idea I was finding my future wife, the mother of my children, the partner of my dreams." Virginia leaned against his shoulder, contentment washing over her. "Life is full of unexpected turns, isn't it? The path I thought I was traveling with Thomas led me to a completely different destination, a better one than I could have imagined." "Do you ever regret it?" Jack asked quietly. "Coming west with him, all you went through?" Virginia considered the question carefully. "No," she said finally. "Without that journey, I would never have found my way here to you and our children. Every step, even the painful ones, led me exactly where I was meant to be." As darkness settled over the ranch and the first stars appeared in the velvet sky, Virginia and Jack remained on the porch, hands clasped, hearts aligned, partners in the truest sense of the word. From the darkest moment of her life, standing alone at a grave with nothing, had come the greatest blessings she could have imagined. And as Jack drew her into his arms, his kiss still making her heart race after all these years, Virginia knew with absolute certainty that this was not an ending, but a continuing beginning. Each day, a new opportunity to build their life together on the foundation of respect, partnership, and deep, abiding love they had created from the ashes of her grief. The path ahead stretched before them, filled with promise and possibility, a future they would face as they had faced everything since that fateful day at the cemetery, hand in hand, side by side, 2 hearts beating as one on the wild frontier they called home.